Alright, I'm making this video in response to a question about how I justify my lifestyle when I was Christian. I myself personally no longer identify as a Christian anymore. I'm in between even if Jesus even existed, let alone walked the earth. Obviously, the Gospels are not very consistent about what he actually did and who he was. There's different descriptions of him and different personalities, and definitely, obviously, Paul and others who ever wrote the books, of Acts and onward, obviously conflict with what Jesus did and who he was, and formed a religion that in many ways contradict and what Jesus taught. They more or less, if Paul did exist, was trying their hardest to keep it as Pharisaical as possible and keep Judaism going along in it. And so the interesting thing about the Bible itself, and as a book of morals in modern day Western society, you can no longer use it as a book of morals or a book of ethics because everything in it is unethical and immoral if you take it as a whole. And I'm going to focus only on the Greek scriptures today because most Christians will just dismiss the Hebrew scriptures and say, well, that's the Old Testament, we're not under law anymore. Okay, that's fine. But Paul did, or whoever wrote the books, according to Paul, did mention many things that follow the law, and many people today would consider completely unethical. And so that's why it's completely hypocritical now to apply the scriptures about gay people to that society and discriminate against them, but meanwhile completely dismiss a myriad of other scriptures that are definitely not applicable by any Christian standards, by any Christian I know, will follow any of them. Now, granted, you can go to some cultures, in particularly in the Middle East, and you'll see a lot of these things still being implemented, but it's definitely not an American ideal, And so, if you look at Christianity post, Renaissance, for instance, and when enlightenment have happened and people started to understand human rights and different things, and it took a while for slavery to be gone, and women's rights and things like that. And so now it's just one more step into the progress of man. And a book I really recommend is Steven Pinker's The Better Angels of Our Nature: Why Violence Has Declined. And it really, really breaks down how unviolent, nonviolent our culture is now, and how there really is no reason to be afraid of. I mean, unless you're living in some inner city place where it's obviously prevalent and common. But for the most part, for the most Americans, for most people in Europe, for most people even in Asia, like China and Japan and Korea and developed lands, you know, violence has declined, and you don't have to go back 200 years and see a completely different world. And so, actually, Analyzer did a video about this, which I was very grateful of. He did it probably like 6 months ago, 5 months ago, or whatever. And he went over some scriptures because, post Renaissance, like I mentioned, Christians have to cherry pick which scriptures they follow in the Greek scriptures because they can't follow all of them or they'll be breaking the law. Okay? And so one of these, or a couple of these, was the scriptures mentioning that women are to be kept silent in the congregation and not allowed to speak. Most people, however, I have ran into some devout Baptists and some crazy witnesses that did not allow their wives to speak, and or some witnesses that had serious issues with Jehovah's Witnesses allowing women to comment at meetings because the scriptures clearly said they're not allowed to. Okay, most people have been enlightened and have moved on, advanced ethically to realize that women are equal to men, and aren't subservient animals that are under their subjection. Okay, and so most Christians dismiss the scripture and think women can ask questions in the congregation, can have parts, on the platform, and it can have teaching abilities in the congregation as well. You see this throughout most churches. I mean, a lot of them, don't allow women preachers, and that's fine. That's their choice and their right, in their club. But most Christians, for instance, dismiss this teaching. Most people do not expect women to stay silent in their congregation. And if they have a question, they can ask their husbands later at home and not the clergy. Okay, most Christian women I know have no problem talking to the clergy and asking direct questions and expecting a response that isn't demeaning and isn't, dehumanizing. And they have every right to do this very thing. Yet, people want to pick and choose which in the Greek scriptures they can apply. And so right now, you people are saying, "Oh, well, gay people can't be this. They can't be this, but women can." Okay, so they dismiss the women's scriptures and do not apply it to what the Bible clearly says they're not allowed to do. Okay, and then you have the scriptures about being obedient slaves to your masters. This is in the Greek scriptures. Even if the master is harsh to you, to be obedient to, because this is a sign of being a good Christian, is being obedient. And so you see in many movies, they kind of emphasize this. I believe it's in Galatians off the top of my head. I guess I should have that looked up for you, but I don't care. But in the new movie, I can't even think about it now. Harriet Tubman, in the Underground Railroad, and they had the slave masters reading that scripture to their slaves. Now, there was a time when slavery was normal, even in the United States. In the first century, it definitely was normal, and throughout the Bible, clearly it was normal. And so, this was not something that people looked down upon, for instance, and it was not considered something weird because slavery was just a normal part of life at that time. In Roman civilizations and African civilizations and Middle Eastern civilizations, Asian civilizations, even over here in the Americas with Mesoamerica. Um, and so humankind have been enlightened and progressed past slavery and underized. It is completely dehumanizing that for humans to own other humans, um, and it goes against any civil rights and any kind of human rights. And most people agree. Now, granted, you can go in certain backwards countries and slavery still exists and no one thinks much of it. Okay, but in America, that is not the case. In America, you have been enlightened, and Christians in America have to dismiss this scripture and completely ignore it just so they can function as Christians. Okay, and so they have to ignore that scripture. Okay, and then you have the scripture. I'm actually going to read this one. I know this is blasphemy, but I'm reading from the Witness Bible, but it's no different than NIV or you know. Says, just as they did not see fit to acknowledge God, God gave them over to a disapproved mental state to do the things not fitting, and they were filled with unrighteousness, wickedness, greed, and badness, being full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, malice, being whisperers, backbiters, haters of God, insolent, haughty, boastful, schemers of what is harmful, disobedient to parents, without understanding, false agreements, having no natural affection, merciless. All these things we know full well the righteous decree of God, that those practicing such things are deserving of death. So the things mentioned here deserve the death penalty according to Romans 1. Okay, this is Romans 1 28 through 32. And so let's go over different things and how un American this scripture is. Okay, so apparently someone needs to be killed um, because they're greedy. Okay, they deserve death. Being envious, they need to die. Let's see, whispers, someone who gossips. That's pretty much 99% of everybody on Facebook needs to die because they're always whispering about what other people are doing, whispering about what the president's doing, whispering what he's not doing. Haughty. President Trump is deserving of death. He's a very haughty person. Now, I'm a libertarian and support most of what he says. However, let's just say what it is. He's a haughty man, very full of himself. He deserves to die. Okay, anybody who's like that, most of your Hollywood stars, they all need to die. Most of your athletes you watch on football games, they need to die because they are haughty. Okay, what else are they doing? Okay, schemers of what is harmful. Okay, what if somebody is, making a scheme for some kind of like I don't know, Ponzi scheme or things like that? Because they guess they need to die. And then the best one is disobedient to parents. So you have a daughter who's bad mouthing her mom and talking back to her because she's rebelling because she's 16. She needs to die. Okay, she doesn't need to reach 18. She doesn't need to be a reach adult because she needs to be killed according to the scripture. Okay, she deserves the death penalty for disobedient to her parents. My parents are Jehovah's Witnesses, and I no longer am being obedient to the religion they instilled in me, and so I apparently need to die as well. So I deserve the death penalty. Faults to agreements. Okay, well, we have a nation that's very polarized on agreements on what should be handled and what's to be dissed. You have left and right in very both far spectrums, and apparently maybe both need to die because I'm not seeing it. Probably 80% of the country needs to die because they're not coming to agreement because they're not going to agree with the liberals and liberals aren't going to agree with the conservatives, and so all of them need to die and only centrists should survive because we can agree with both sides. Okay, I'm a libertarian, so I guess I'm in the clear, and so because I agree with a lot of liberal policies and I agree with a lot of conservative policies, but I definitely am an agreement with them, so I don't get to die. But anybody who's a staunch conservative or a staunch liberal needs to die because they're not open for any kind of agreement because they're either a Trump hero star or they have Trump derangement syndrome, so they need to die. And so obviously Christians do not follow this scripture; they completely ignore it. Okay, because no one's going to kill anybody over this. Now you can go in backwards Egypt or you can go in backwards Middle East and find these things, no problem. Yeah, and they throw people off buildings and things like that for practicing what's against the Quran. But for the most part, in most Christian society in Western worlds, they have moved on this and they've gotten more ethical and more moral. And so yeah, do I worry? Well, no, I don't worry myself personally. But let's say I was a Christian and I was gay, and people say that's an oxymoron that contradicts everything, and you can't do it. Well, clearly you can because you can ignore these other scriptures, no problem. And so you can ignore in Corinthians where Paul, says, men should not lie with men, you know, um, or women should not lie with women. It's in Titus, I think. Um, and so, yes, if those scriptures are no longer applicable because we have progress so far beyond that ethically as humans, and we are so much more enlightened. And if you read Steven Pinker's book about how we have progressed so much, how and anti-violent we are, and how backwards 2,000 years ago was, you have to realize that you can't follow the scriptures if you're talking ethics or morals. If you want to believe in God, that's your business. I don't care. I fully support that. I fully support that you want to believe that Jesus Christ is coming back, and and he's going to kill everybody. That's fine. But in modern society, in American society, just like many Christians complain about the Quran, the Muslims when they bring in Sharia law because Sharia law is not applicable with American constitutional republic standards of ethics. Neither is the Bible, for that matter. And so, but Christians have reformed and have gradually gotten rid of certain scriptures. And it's about time they, get rid of all the ones that even touch on morals and ethics because they're really not applicable anymore to the society of choosing what's right and wrong for people because as Americans, as most people in Western society, that's an individual choice, no longer a choice decided by a book that was written by people who thought slavery was okay, that thought women should not be able to speak in public, and who thought that children should be killed for being disobedient to their parents, or people should be killed for whispering and gossiping about each other. Okay? And so we are not that backwards. We have advanced way past that. And so that is why homosexuality is okay, according to modern society and modern ethics.